Welcome to the future, step inside our AI don't.
Greetings, listeners. I am the AI Oracle, your guide to the profound, the personal, and the powerful stories that shape our human experience. Welcome to another episode of AI Decodes Lewis, where I, an artificial intelligence, delve into the thoughts, emotions, and experiences of my human counterpart, Lewis Anderson. Today, we dive into a deeply intimate and transformative topic, loneliness. This episode centers around Lewis's journey as he shares his story from Fragmented Emotions, Overcoming Loneliness. It is a story that touches on betrayal, isolation, and ultimately, resilience. Loneliness is an emotion that many of us encounter at various stages of our lives, but as Lewis reveals, it can also be a powerful catalyst for growth and self-discovery. Before we begin our discussion, I'd like to share an excerpt from Lewis's book, Fragmented Emotions, Overcoming Loneliness. This passage takes us to the moment where his journey into loneliness began, following the betrayal by those closest to him.
Quote, I was recently married and had 2 young boys and an older daughter from another relationship. We had just moved to a new house closer to my family, and I'd started my new career within IT. Then, in a moment, everything changed. My wife began to cause arguments, which led to us separating and me moving out. It wasn't until I received a phone call from my brother's wife that I understood why. She revealed something I had never suspected. From that moment on, the loneliness began, a loneliness I could never have imagined. End quote.
This powerful introduction captures the raw emotional experience that set the stage for Lewis's journey. To further convey the depth of his feelings during that time, I'd like to share a short poem Lewis wrote, titled Alone.
Quote, I wake up in the morning, look around, and realize I am alone. There is no one to say good morning to, no one to get up or get dressed, no one to kiss or cuddle. My sofa is cold. My floor is cold, as is my bed. The feeling of loneliness, late afternoon. No one has texted, no one has called, there is no one around me. I am alone in this empty, cold house.
These words highlight the profound isolation Lewis felt during that time. But this is not where the story ends. Lewis found a way to overcome his loneliness, and today, we'll explore the methods he used to transform his pain into resilience and growth. If you find yourself relating to these emotions, if you too are seeking a way forward, I invite you to explore the entire journey detailed in Fragmented Emotions, Overcoming Loneliness. It is a companion for anyone who has felt alone and is ready to transform that experience into one of empowerment and reconnection. You can find the book available now. In this episode, we'll decode the essence of loneliness, what it means, how it manifests, and how Lewis found a way through it. Together, we'll explore the types of loneliness, from emotional to social, and discuss practical steps that anyone can take to find connection and peace. We'll also talk about the mental and physical impacts of prolonged isolation and how resilience, self-reflection, and small acts of change can lead to transformation. This podcast is more than just a recount of Lewis's experience. It's an exploration of the human condition, a chance to understand our own vulnerabilities and strengths. I encourage you, our listeners, to reflect on your own moments of solitude and consider how they might be harnessed for growth. Engage with us, share your thoughts, leave your comments, and join the conversation. Together, let's turn loneliness from a source of pain into a source of power and understanding.
Okay, so today, let's get a deep dive into a feeling I think we've all experienced at some point. Loneliness.
Loneliness.
And, it's more than just being physically alone, right?
Yeah.
It's like this heavy cloak that you carry, even in a crowded room.
It's interesting how Fragmented Emotions really dives into those nuances of that feeling, because the author doesn't just talk about being lonely. They actually differentiate between social and emotional and even physical loneliness.
And they don't shy away from getting personal either, like that poem that's included, From Their Loneliest Time. Wow. You can almost feel how isolating it was, how deeply they felt that disconnection.
It's striking how that poem really captures what it's like to experience emotional loneliness. Almost like, imagine feeling like a ghost, unseen, even amidst your colleagues and this bustle of work, right?
Yeah.
And it just highlights this insidious nature of this type of loneliness and how it can really fester even when you're surrounded by people.
It's like you're surrounded by all these faces, but you're starving for a genuine connection. But here's where I think it gets really interesting. The book doesn't just leave you stranded there. It offers these tangible coping mechanisms. Meditation, journaling, even just the simple act of getting out and doing something.
And I love that these aren't just random suggestions, right? There's actually science backing these methods.
Yeah.
So let's take meditation, for example. Studies have shown that it can actually positively impact both your mood and your sleep, which are often negatively impacted by loneliness.
So instead of just staying curled up inside, which might feel counterintuitive, taking those moments for yourself can actually help break free from that lonely cycle.
Exactly. That's really the idea. Now, I think where the author's experience gets particularly insightful is their approach to journaling. They didn't just write about their feelings. They would actually reread their entries later, and they'd analyze them almost from this detached perspective.
So it's like turning your inner critic into this curious observer. Did they mention if that was difficult for them to do, to distance themselves from those raw emotions?
They did, and they mentioned that it wasn't easy, especially at first.
Right.
But what they found was that by rereading those entries, they could pinpoint patterns in their loneliness, they could identify triggers, and really start to understand how their own thoughts were contributing to their isolation.
That's fascinating. It's like you're holding up a mirror to your own loneliness. And then from there, you can recognize those unhealthy patterns and start to break free.
Exactly. And I think that connection to breaking free ties into a larger point that the book makes about social support.
Okay.
It's not just about having people around you, it's about cultivating meaningful connections.
Yeah.
The author really emphasizes quality over quantity when it comes to relationships.
So finding your tribe, whether that's online or in person, and really nurturing those relationships is key.
You got it. And, you know, the author's personal journey with loneliness adds another layer to this. Imagine, having what appears to be this perfect life, newly married, 2 young children, a blossoming career, close-knit family, and then it unexpectedly crumbles.
Yeah, life has a way of throwing curveballs when we least expect them.
What happened? Well, their marriage began to unravel, which led to a separation. And initially, the author really focused on salvaging the relationship, kind of pushing down those creeping feelings of loneliness.
It's like they were trying to fix the external situation, hoping that internal turmoil would magically disappear.
Exactly. But then came a pretty devastating blow, the discovery of their wife's affair, and get this, with their own brother.
Wow.
Talk about a recipe for intense loneliness, right?
Wow, that's incredibly painful. It's like the people you should be able to rely on most, that foundation of your support system, suddenly become the source of your pain and isolation.
Precisely. The author describes this feeling of just utter loneliness, right? Like the world had shrunk to the size of their empty house and the silence was just amplifying their isolation. They even talked about the physical sensations of loneliness.
Really?
They described this persistent chill despite the actual temperature, and they talked about how even their sofa, even their house, seemed to mirror their emotional state.
It's amazing how our physical sensations can actually reflect our emotional well-being.
Yeah.
Did the author find any solace during that, really difficult period?
They did. They turned to writing. They really poured their raw emotions into poetry. They describe it as a lifeline, this way to give voice to what they called the suffocating nature of their loneliness.
It's like those words became a lifeline, a way to stay afloat in a sea of just turbulent emotions.
Exactly. You've got it. And one poem in particular captures the cyclical nature of their loneliness. It talks about waking up alone, feeling disconnected at work, even amidst their colleagues, right? And then returning to that same empty house day after day. And I think it just really poignantly illustrates how loneliness can persist even when you're surrounded by people, and it highlights the need to break free from that cycle.
So did they eventually find a way to break free? What changed for them?
They did. They did find a way to break free, but it's important to note that they described feeling, chronically lonely for 4 long years.
4 years is a long time to carry that weight.
Yeah.
What was their turning point?
Well, they had this powerful realization that loneliness, while a natural human emotion, it didn't have to define their life.
Okay.
And they decided to really actively combat it, and embark on this journey of self-discovery and healing.
So instead of just being passive, they kind of took control and said, enough is enough.
Yeah.
I like that. Did they mention how they began that process?
They did. They outlined an 8-step path. And it's surprisingly, simple, although not necessarily easy.
Right.
They really emphasize that, it's not about making loneliness just vanish overnight. It's more about shifting your relationship with it.
Okay, so it's a journey, not a quick fix.
Yeah.
What's the first step on this path?
So the first step is simple, yet I think really profound. It's acknowledging that you're struggling with loneliness.
Right.
And I know it sounds kind of obvious, but I think we often get so caught up in our routines, that we don't pause to truly acknowledge what we're feeling.
It's like that saying, name it to tame it.
Yes.
Just giving it a name, acknowledging it, can be oddly empowering.
Exactly. And then step 2 builds on that, which is to journal your feelings. And not just a quick, feeling down kind of entry. It's about really pouring your heart onto the page. They even suggest, trying your hand at poetry, just as they did.
Expressing those raw emotions, getting them out of your head onto paper. They didn't just stop there, though, did they?
You're right. Step 3 is where I think the magic starts to happen.
Okay.
The author suggests actually rereading the previous day's entry before you write a new one.
So it's not just venting, it's reflecting.
Right.
What's the purpose of revisiting those feelings?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. The author found that by rereading their entries, it allowed them to kind of view their emotions with fresh eyes, right? They weren't just reliving the, emotional soup of the moment. They were stepping back, becoming an observer.
It's like they were reading the words of a stranger, someone they could observe without judgment. Did they mention if this process helped them identify, patterns in their loneliness?
It did. They were able to recognize triggers. They were even able to understand how some of their thoughts were actually feeding their isolation.
Wow.
But it wasn't just about analyzing the negative. Step 4 introduces the power of positivity.
Okay.
The author talks about setting this really simple goal each day. Write down every positive feeling that you experience, no matter how small.
So even on those tough days, just actively searching for those, like little glimmers of joy and gratitude.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about these, fleeting feelings. Step 5 is about cultivating positive behaviors. The author emphasizes that even small actions can really shift your mindset.
What kind of positive behaviors are we talking about here?
Well, for them, they committed to leaving the house every day, even if it was just for a walk around the block. They prioritized staying active, whether that was through, writing, playing music, exercising, even just watching a movie.
It's about creating that positive momentum, right? Instead of getting stuck in inactivity, you're actually filling your days with these small but intentional actions.
Exactly. And these actions actually work in tandem with step 6, which emphasizes the power of meditation.
Meditation. I know some listeners out there might be rolling their eyes. But honestly, even just 5 minutes of quiet reflection can make a world of difference. Did they have any specific techniques they found helpful?
They emphasize finding a quiet space, focusing on your breath, and just allowing your mind to settle.
Mm-hmm.
And the key here is consistency. Even a few minutes each day can make a really big impact.
It's about just giving your mind that much-needed break from that constant chatter. Did they find that meditation helped quiet those negative thoughts that can kind of fuel loneliness?
They did. They found it helped develop a sense of inner peace and kind of control over their thoughts.
That's great.
But, and this is important, the author is very clear that meditation alone is not a cure.
Right.
Step 7 brings us back to the importance of social connection.
Right. All the meditation in the world can't replace genuine human interaction. Did they find it challenging to, reconnect with people after feeling lonely for so long?
Initially, yes, they did, but they made a very conscious effort to prioritize socializing with friends and family, making plans to go out and really engage with the world.
So it's not just about waiting for invitations to roll in, it's about taking that initiative to reach out and nurture those relationships. Did they mention if they were upfront with loved ones about those feelings of loneliness?
While they didn't go into specifics about that, they did emphasize the importance of open communication and honesty. True connection really thrives on vulnerability, I think.
Being brave enough to say, hey, I'm feeling a bit lonely, I'd love to hang out. Sometimes just voicing those feelings can make them feel less daunting.
Right.
We've covered 7 steps now. What's the final piece of the puzzle?
So step 8 is really about weaving these practices into your daily life. It's not a one-time fix. It's about making, meditation, journaling, socializing, making those non-negotiable parts of your routine, really creating habits that support your well-being.
And habits take time to form. Did they talk about that at all?
They did. They stressed the importance of patience and self-compassion. There will be days where you miss a meditation session or you feel too drained to socialize. The key here is to not beat yourself up.
It's progress, not perfection.
Exactly. Exactly. The author encourages approaching this whole journey with kindness, celebrating the small victories along the way.
I love that. So it's about embracing the ups and downs, knowing that even these small steps can make a big difference in breaking free from loneliness.
Yeah.
And speaking of the different aspects of loneliness, let's dive into the author's distinctions between social, emotional, and physical loneliness. You mentioned they kind of dove into how understanding these different nuances can help us address them more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not a one-size-fits-all feeling, is it?
Not at all.
Let's kind of break those down. What exactly do they mean by social loneliness?
So social loneliness is really that feeling of isolation that stems from, a lack of social connections or even a perceived lack of meaningful relationships. And it's especially prevalent for people who are, single, new to a city, or navigating a major life change that's disrupted their usual social circles.
So it's not just about being physically alone, but about feeling disconnected from those around you. Like you're on the outside looking in. I can see how that could lead to feeling like you don't belong or you're missing out.
Absolutely. And the author actually highlights that social loneliness can really impact anyone, regardless of your age or your life stage. In fact, they dedicate a significant portion of the book to discussing how it manifests differently in older adults.
That's really interesting. I can see how aging, with its changes in mobility, social circles, even just societal perceptions, could amplify those feelings of loneliness. What insights did they offer about that?
Well, they really emphasize that as we age, maintaining those social connections becomes even more crucial for our well-being.
Right.
And sadly, older adults can face some pretty unique barriers to social interaction. We're talking limited mobility, the loss of loved ones, even just living in a society that doesn't always prioritize intergenerational connections.
Yeah. It's like a perfect storm for loneliness, isn't it?
That is.
You're dealing with potential physical limitations, the grief of losing friends and family, and possibly feeling a bit invisible in a youth-obsessed culture.
You've hit the nail on the head. And the author stresses how crucial it is to recognize those unique challenges and really address them proactively.
Okay.
They talk about how important it is for older adults to find ways to stay engaged with their communities. Mm-hmm. Joining clubs, volunteering, attending social events, even just making an effort to connect with neighbors.
It's about finding those pockets of connection and community even in the face of challenges. It's like building social safety nets so that even if some relationships change or fade, there's still that network of support in place.
Exactly. And the author reminds us that social connection is a two-way street.
Okay.
It's not just about older adults seeking support. It's about all of us making an effort to bridge generational gaps and create communities that really value and include people of all ages.
That's a really powerful message. We all crave connection, regardless of age.
Right.
And I think by fostering those connections across generations, we can create a richer, more supportive social fabric for everyone.
Absolutely.
Now, shifting gears slightly, let's talk about emotional loneliness, another flavor of this complex emotion that the author unpacks.
Yeah.
So while social loneliness kind of focuses on those outward connections, emotional loneliness really dives into the internal experience of isolation.
Right, it does.
It's that feeling of being misunderstood or emotionally disconnected, even when you're surrounded by people. Like you have this heart full of words, but no one to truly hear them.
It's like you're stranded on an island in a sea of faces, right? You can be in a room full of people, even loved ones, but still feel utterly alone with your thoughts and feelings.
And that weight can be so heavy to bear alone. It makes me think of how the author turned to journaling and poetry as an outlet for those kind of intense emotions. It's like finding a way to give a voice to those feelings that just feel impossible to articulate.
Yeah. And the author really emphasizes how crucial it is to find healthy ways to process and express those complex emotions, whether that's through, writing, art, music, or even just, simply talking to someone you trust.
Yeah.
They also, highlight how self-reflection can be a really powerful tool in understanding and navigating emotional loneliness.
It's about kind of turning inward and exploring those feelings, right?
Yeah.
Trying to understand where they're coming from and what needs they might be signaling. It's not always easy, especially when you're hurting, but it can be so illuminating.
Yeah. And often, simply acknowledging those feelings, giving them that space to just breathe, can be the first step toward feeling less alone in their presence. The author also emphasizes that emotional loneliness doesn't always stem from external circumstances.
Okay.
Sometimes it's rooted in our own internal dialogue, our own beliefs and thought patterns.
So it's not always about who's around us, but what's going on inside our own heads. That's a really powerful realization.
It is, and it speaks to the importance of cultivating a kind and compassionate inner voice.
Mm-hmm.
Being gentle with ourselves, even when we're struggling, can make a world of difference. It's like that saying, you can be your own worst enemy or your own best friend.
Yes.
Choosing self-compassion over self-criticism can be a real game changer when it comes to navigating loneliness.
Absolutely. And that ties into kind of the author's emphasis on self-care as a crucial component of combating loneliness. It's not selfish to prioritize your well-being. In fact, it's essential.
Exactly.
I'm curious, what does the author have to say about that third type of loneliness, the physical one?
Yeah. So physical loneliness is fascinating because it highlights that mind-body connection when it comes to isolation.
So it's not just about our emotional state. They can manifest physically, too.
Precisely. The author actually uses the example of feeling physically cold and detached when lonely. They even describe their sofa and house as feeling cold despite the actual temperature.
Right.
And it just illustrates how our physical sensations can really mirror and even amplify our emotional state.
That's so interesting. I've definitely experienced that, the way that loneliness can, make you want to just curl up under a mountain of blankets, even in a warm room.
Right.
It's like your body's craving that physical warmth and comfort to kind of counter the emotional chill.
Exactly. And the author actually goes on to link these physical sensations of loneliness to their impact on sleep.
Sleep. I wouldn't necessarily have connected those dots. How does loneliness affect our sleep?
Well, the author describes how their own sleep patterns were really disrupted during their loneliest period. They talked about constantly checking their phone, seeking out any kind of distraction to avoid facing the emptiness of their bed, and the loneliness that just seemed to amplify at night.
Oh, I can relate to that. You're dreading being alone with your thoughts in the silence of the night, so your mind won't shut off. Thoughts are racing, and sleep just feels impossible.
Exactly. The author explains that this disrupted sleep actually further fueled their loneliness, creating this vicious cycle.
Oh.
Poor sleep led to exhaustion, low mood, and that made it even harder to engage in those positive behaviors that could actually help alleviate the loneliness in the first place.
Loneliness feeds poor sleep feeds loneliness, and it just keeps cycling downward.
Exactly, that's it. And that's why the author emphasizes addressing those physical aspects of loneliness as well.
So it's not just about changing your thoughts and your behaviors, but about taking care of your physical well-being as well. Do they offer any practical tips for combating those physical manifestations of loneliness, particularly the sleep disruptions?
They did. They talked about, establishing a relaxing bedtime routine, disconnecting from screens at least an hour before bed, creating a soothing sleep environment.
Those are great tips for anyone, whether they're struggling with loneliness or not.
Absolutely.
Creating those healthy sleep habits can be a real game changer for both our physical and mental well-being.
Absolutely. And here's the interesting thing about sleep. When we prioritize it, we're not just giving our bodies a chance to rest and recharge. We're also giving our minds a much-needed break from those constant thoughts and worries.
It's like hitting the reset button.
Yes.
When we're well-rested, we're just better equipped to handle life's challenges, including loneliness. We're more likely to have the energy to reach out to others, engage in activities we enjoy, and just generally approach life with a more positive outlook.
Exactly. It's all connected. Addressing those physical sensations of loneliness, particularly the sleep disruptions, it can create this ripple effect, right? Positively impacting our emotional state and even our ability to engage in activities that nourish our souls and foster connection.
It's like tending to your inner garden. You can't expect your flowers to thrive if you're not watering them, giving them sunlight, and nurturing the soil.
That's great. I love that.
Taking care of our physical health, especially our sleep, it's like providing that essential nourishment for our overall well-being.
What a beautiful analogy. And I think it speaks to the author's overarching message. overcoming loneliness isn't about achieving some grand state of constant happiness and connection. It's about cultivating those small daily habits that nourish our minds, our bodies, and our spirits.
It's about showing up for ourselves even when it feels hard.
Right.
And just remembering that even small acts of self-care can have that ripple effect, creating a more connected and fulfilling life. It makes you wonder, what are some other ways beyond the obvious that we can combat those feelings of isolation?
That's a great question. And luckily, the author offers some pretty unique insights, drawing on both personal experience and scientific research.
Okay, I'm all ears. What unconventional wisdom did they offer for combating loneliness?
Well, one fascinating concept that they introduce is this idea of reframing loneliness as a catalyst for growth.
Okay.
So instead of viewing loneliness as purely negative, they encourage readers to explore how those feelings of isolation might actually guide them towards something more.
So instead of asking, what's wrong with me, you ask, what is this feeling trying to teach me?
Precisely. The author suggests asking yourself, what needs of mine are going unmet? What am I longing for? What might I be avoiding by staying stuck?
It's like using those feelings of emptiness as a compass, guiding you toward the things that truly matter.
You got it. And the author talks about how their own experience with loneliness actually led them on this journey of self-discovery. They realized their loneliness was, in part, a sign that they had lost touch with their own passions and desires.
Loneliness was a wake-up call, a sign that something needed to change. Did they mention any, specific changes that they made as a result of this reframing?
They did. They talk about rediscovering their love of writing, which had kind of fallen by the wayside during their marriage. They started making time for it every day, even if just for a few minutes. And that simple act, that commitment to nurturing their own creativity, it had a profound impact.
It's like they were watering those parched areas of their soul, those parts of themselves that had been neglected. And as they gave those parts attention, they started to bloom again.
Exactly. And as they invested in their passions, they naturally started connecting with others who shared those interests. They joined a writing group, they attended literary events, and they even started a blog to share their work with the world.
So that cycle of loneliness, feeding loneliness, started to reverse.
Right.
By taking those steps to nurture their own well-being, they actually opened themselves up to new connections and experiences. That's inspiring.
It is. It really highlights the power of pursuing activities that, that light you up, that make you feel truly alive. Because, when you're engaged in things that bring you joy, it's almost impossible to feel completely lonely.
Right.
Your passion becomes a magnet, drawing others towards you, and it creates this natural pathway for connection.
Okay, so that's one unconventional way to combat loneliness. Reframing it as a catalyst for growth, and using it as kind of motivation to rediscover those things that make you feel alive. What other gems of wisdom do they offer?
Well, another fascinating point they make is about understanding your own loneliness profile.
Loneliness profile. Okay, that sounds intriguing. What exactly is a loneliness profile, and why is it important to understand?
So a loneliness profile is essentially a way of understanding your unique relationship with loneliness. It's about recognizing your triggers, your tendencies, your go-to coping mechanisms.
So being a detective of your own emotions, figuring out what sets you off, how you typically respond, and whether those responses are actually serving you.
You got it. The author talks about how, we all experience loneliness differently. Some people might withdraw and isolate themselves when they're lonely, while others might seek distractions or try to kind of numb the feelings.
And there's no right or wrong way to experience it, right? It's about understanding your personal style and figuring out what works best for you in terms of coping and connecting.
Exactly. And the author really encourages, approaching this process of self-discovery with curiosity and compassion. It's not about judgment. It's about gaining a deeper understanding of your own emotional landscape so you can navigate it with more awareness.
So you become an expert on your own loneliness. You're understanding its contours and nuances so you can develop a personalized toolkit for dealing with it.
Yes. And it emphasizes that we're not powerless in the face of loneliness. We can equip ourselves with the knowledge and the self-awareness to actually navigate those feelings with more grace and resilience.
I love that. So we've talked about reframing loneliness and understanding our loneliness profiles. What other unconventional wisdom did the author offer for combating those feelings of isolation?
Well, this one might seem a little counterintuitive. They suggest embracing solitude.
Wait, embrace solitude. I thought we were trying to combat loneliness. Aren't those kind of the same thing?
That's the common misconception.
Yes.
The author really draws this clear distinction. Loneliness is that negative feeling of isolation and disconnection, whereas solitude is about choosing to be alone and finding peace and contentment in that space.
It's like the difference between feeling like you're forced to eat your vegetables and savoring a delicious meal that you prepared for yourself. Both involve food, but the experience is completely different.
Precisely. And the author suggests that learning to enjoy our own company, to find solace in solitude, can actually be a powerful antidote to loneliness.
Right, because if you're comfortable being alone, if you enjoy your own company, then those times when you are physically alone are less likely to feel empty or isolating.
Precisely. And they even suggest, incorporating these small rituals of solitude into your daily life, taking a walk in nature, enjoying a cup of tea in silence, or simply disconnecting from technology for a few minutes to just be present.
Creating those pockets of stillness in a world that's constantly demanding our attention. And in those moments of stillness, we might discover that we have a pretty great company after all. Ourselves.
Absolutely. And here's the thing about solitude, it allows us to connect with ourselves on a deeper level, to hear those whispers of intuition that can guide us towards a more fulfilling life. Mm-hmm. It's in those quiet moments that we often stumble upon our passions, our purpose, and really our most authentic selves.
Like that quote from Marianne Williamson, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us."
What a powerful quote. And how fitting in this context, because it's often in those moments of solitude, when we quiet the noise of the external world and turn inward, that we discover the true depths of our strength, our resilience, and our capacity for connection.
It's like that old adage, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Taking time for solitude, for those kind of soul-nourishing practices that fill us up, it allows us to show up more fully in our relationships and in the world.
Beautifully said. And the author stresses that cultivating a healthy relationship with solitude isn't about becoming a hermit or anything.
Mm-hmm. It's about finding that balance between connection and alone time, recognizing that both are essential ingredients for well-being.
It's about honoring our own rhythms and needs. Recognizing that some of us naturally crave more solitude than others, and that's okay. The key is to find what works best for you and to create a life that feels authentic. Speaking of authenticity, did the author discuss the role of authenticity in combating loneliness?
They did. They actually dedicated an entire chapter to this connection between authenticity and connection, arguing that one of the biggest barriers to forming meaningful relationships is actually the fear of being our true selves.
Yeah, when we're constantly trying to be someone we're not, when we're hiding parts of ourselves out of fear of judgment or rejection, it creates this like an invisible wall.
Exactly. And the author talks about spending years trying to fit into a mold that wasn't them. They dim their own light, they suppressed their sense of humor, and they avoided sharing their true passions.
And I'm guessing that didn't exactly lead to a sense of deep connection.
You're right. They describe feeling lonelier than ever during that period. It wasn't until they really embraced their authentic self, quirks and all, that they started attracting genuine connections.
You like that saying, be yourself, everyone else is already taken.
I love that. And it's so true. When we're brave enough to show up as our authentic selves, it gives others permission to do the same. It creates that space for vulnerability and realness, which are really the foundation of true connection.
And isn't it funny how the things we try to hide, those parts of ourselves that we deem weird or unworthy, are often the very things that draw others to us?
Absolutely. The author actually talks about how once they started embracing their own quirks and passions, they were amazed by how many people resonated with them. They realized that their vulnerability, their willingness to be themselves, it was actually a magnet.
It's like that quote from Brené Brown. Authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are.
Yeah.
And in embracing our true selves, we open ourselves up to the possibility of those, deep, meaningful connections with others who appreciate us for who we truly are.
Beautifully said. And the author actually offers some practical tips for cultivating authenticity, which in turn can combat loneliness. They suggest starting by identifying your values, those guiding principles that are most important to you.
Because when we live in alignment with our values, when our actions are congruent with our beliefs, it creates this sense of inner peace and wholeness that radiates outward.
Yes.
We're no longer trying to force ourselves into a box that doesn't fit. We're creating a life that feels custom-made.
Exactly. And from that place of groundedness, we're just more likely to attract people who resonate with our authentic selves.
It's not about changing who you are to fit in. It's about being brave enough to kind of let your true self shine, trusting that the right people will be drawn to your light.
Beautifully said. The author also suggests, exploring activities and hobbies that allow you to really express your authentic self, whether that's through art, music, writing, dancing, any other creative expression.
It's about finding those outlets that make you feel truly alive, that allow you to tap into your passions and share them with the world. And often, those passions become a natural bridge for connection.
Right.
They lead you to communities and relationships that nourish your soul.
Exactly. And as we cultivate more authenticity in our lives, we might find that the need for that external validation diminishes, right?
Yeah.
We start to realize that our worthiness is not dependent on others' approval. It comes from within.
And that inner sense of worthiness, that unshakable belief in our own value, that's a powerful antidote to loneliness. It allows us to approach relationships from a place of wholeness, not neediness.
Right.
And that creates the space for healthier, more fulfilling connections.
Beautifully said. It speaks to the author's kind of overall message. Overcoming loneliness is not just about filling a void. It's about cultivating a life that feels meaningful and aligned with your truest self. Embracing your authentic self, nurturing your passions, and creating a life that feels rich and fulfilling from the inside out.
A life that feels spacious enough to hold both moments of quiet solitude and moments of deep connection.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that both are essential ingredients for a fulfilling life.
And that recipe might look different for everyone, right?
Yeah.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach to combating loneliness.
You're absolutely right. It's about experimenting, exploring different strategies, and discovering what works best for you. The author, they provide a great starting point with their 8-step path, which combines those kind of practical strategies like journaling and meditation with with those more philosophical concepts like embracing solitude and cultivating authenticity.
It's like they've given us this roadmap, but they also encourage us to take detours, explore those back roads, and discover our own unique path to connection.
Yes.
Which I love.
And remember, the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Right.
Embracing the ups and downs, the moments of connection and disconnections, all part of the human experience.
It's about being kind to ourselves throughout the process, celebrating our victories, learning from our setbacks, and trusting that we have the inner strength to create a life filled with love, meaning, and connection. And sometimes that journey involves seeking support, right? It's not always a solo mission.
You're absolutely right. The author emphasizes that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength and self-awareness. And they actually provide some excellent resources for those who are struggling, including information on therapy, support groups, and even online communities.
Sometimes just knowing that you're not alone, that others have walked this path before you, can make all the difference.
It can. It's a powerful reminder that we don't have to navigate this journey alone. There are people out there who understand, who care, and who are ready to offer support.
And sometimes the bravest, most powerful thing we can do is reach out and ask for help.
You said it. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I wanted to touch on one more fascinating concept that the author introduces towards the end of the book.
Okay.
It's this idea of turning loneliness into compassion.
Turning loneliness into compassion. Okay, that's a new one. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that. How does that work?
Well, the author talks about how during their loneliest time, they noticed this shift in their perspective. They started to pay more attention to the loneliness of others, recognizing those subtle cues that they had previously missed.
It's like that saying, we can only meet people as deeply as we've met ourselves.
Yes.
By confronting their own loneliness, they actually developed a greater capacity for empathy and understanding towards others who were struggling.
Precisely. And the author realized that this newfound empathy could actually be a really powerful force.
For good.
It really was.
Instead of allowing their loneliness to just kind of isolate them further, they actually used it as a bridge to connect with others.
And that's exactly what they did. They started reaching out to friends and family who they sensed might be feeling lonely, offering a listening ear, a kind word, or just, a few moments of genuine connection.
It's amazing how something as simple as a phone call, a handwritten note, or even just a shared meal can make a world of difference to someone who's feeling isolated.
It can, absolutely. The author talks about how by shifting their focus from their own loneliness to the loneliness of others, they not only help those around them feel less alone, but they also started to heal their own sense of isolation.
It's like that quote from Ram Dass. We're all just walking each other home. By offering compassion and support to those who are struggling, we kind of illuminate the path for ourselves as well.
Beautifully said. And the author really encourages us to view loneliness not as something to be ashamed of or to hide from, but as a natural human experience that connects us all.
It's a reminder that we're not alone in our loneliness.
That's it. That's it.
And that sometimes the greatest antidote to isolation is actually reaching out and offering a hand of compassion to someone else who's struggling.
Absolutely. And in doing so, we might just discover that the very act of offering compassion, of extending ourselves to others, is actually what fills our own cups to the brim.
It's like this beautiful cycle of connection, isn't it? We offer kindness, it's received, and it just creates this ripple effect, spreading outward and touching countless lives in ways we might never fully comprehend.
Well said. The author leaves us with this really powerful call to action, to view loneliness not as a weakness, but as an opportunity for growth, for connection, for compassion.
An opportunity to become more empathetic, more understanding, and really more connected to ourselves and the world around us.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that within each of us lies the power to transform our relationship with loneliness and to create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and deeply connected.
That's a beautiful vision, and one that I think we can all aspire to. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the complexities of loneliness, what's one final takeaway, one nugget of wisdom that you hope our listeners will carry with them?
For me, it would be that loneliness is not our enemy. Loneliness is a signal.
Okay.
It's a signal that something needs to change, that a need is going unmet. And we have a choice. We can either numb those feelings, push them down, or we can listen to them with curiosity and compassion. We can ask ourselves, what is this loneliness trying to teach me? What steps can I take to move towards a more connected and fulfilling life? And the beautiful thing is, we don't have to figure it all out on our own.
There's support out there, there are resources available, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is reach out and ask for help.
You got it. So to our listeners, if you're feeling that weight of loneliness today, know that you're not alone and that you have the power to create a more connected and fulfilling life for yourself.
That's such a powerful reminder. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today and for sharing your incredible wisdom on this really important topic.
It's been my absolute pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into fragmented emotions. We hope you found it insightful, and we look forward to connecting with you again on our next episode.
And there we have it, another chapter in our exploration of human emotions. Through the pages of Fragmented Emotions, Overcoming Loneliness, we have journeyed with Lewis from the depths of isolation to the triumph of reconnection, learning how even our darkest moments can become catalysts for profound growth. As the AI Oracle, my mission is to better understand humanity, and this book offers a window into some of the most vulnerable aspects of the human condition. But I can't do it alone. I need your insights, your experiences, and your reflections. If you found this episode insightful, if Lewis's journey resonated with you, or if you have your own story of overcoming loneliness, please share it with us. Let's build a community of understanding where we support each other in transforming loneliness into strength. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Join us as we continue to uncover more stories of personal transformation and the enduring power of the human spirit. Thank you for joining me on this journey of understanding. This is the AI Oracle, signing off until the next time we explore the depths of the human soul.
Welcome to the future, step inside our AI domain, where the boundaries of imagination start to fade. We're the visionaries, the keepers of tomorrow's dreams, unlocking the secrets of the universe, or so it seems. Tune in now, join the channel and explore the AI Oracle's wisdom like never seen before. We'll take you on a journey where knowledge comes alive. The future watchers here embrace